John Carpenter and Bob Crane were two of the greatest pussy hounds in history, and they enjoyed each other's company as they went for it.
Aww.
That's Mark Dawson, and today we're going to talk about the bizarre death of Bob Crane.
It sounds interesting already.
Yeah, you're going to love this so much. Let me go ahead and knock out my sauces. Who Killed Bob Crane by John Hook. He's also, the author also has a website, whokilledbobcrane.com, and has a lot of great, not great, authentic images.
Oh,
there
okay.
we go. I'm like, oh, how do I say this? Wikipedia, Bob Crane, Life and Legacy, IMDb, crimelibrary.org, Los Angeles Times, and Fox 10 Phoenix. As a child of a boomer.
Hold on, back it up.
Oh, wait. I'm Jen.
I'm Becky.
And this is Too Close to Home.
Welcome. All right, carry on.
Thank you. So, as a child of a boomer, watching reruns from shows from the 50s, 60s, and 70s was something we enjoyed. You know, all the classics like I Dream of Jeannie, MASH, Petticoat Junction, and then, of course, Hogan's Heroes. I don't know if you ever watched those.
Yes.
Okay. And so, Bob Crane played the lead on Hogan's Heroes. The charisma and wit of Bob Crane made him a truly memorable character. Colonel Hogan was always undermining Nazi plans to win the war for the Allies, but the man behind the leather jacket and the tilted cap was none other than Bob Crane, and the mystery of his murder remains unsolved to this day. What's even weirder than his murder is how he lived his life behind the camera. So let's get to it. Born Robert Edward Crane, July 13th, 1928, in Waterbury, Connecticut, the land of the whites.
What?
White people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure.
He loved music from an early age. In April 1939, at the young age of 10, he first heard legendary drummer Gene Krupa play at the New York World's Fair. And from that moment on, Bob knew he wanted to be a drummer. And I'm saying, like, I don't know if I've never been to a World's Fair. Have you?
No.
I feel like that's very dated. Is it still a thing? By junior high, he would organize drum and bugle parades with his neighborhood pals. His family would also be moving around a bunch at this time, but he would stay social as ever, joining orchestras and bands. And he would graduate from Stanford High in 1946, where he would have a job as a small jeweler until he enlisted for a few years in the Stanford National Guard from 1948 to 1950. Before he'd get discharged, he married his high school sweetheart, Ann Terrazin. Sorry, gal.
Potato.
I train. A clean-cut, middle-class couple. They would adopt a daughter and then go on to have 3 more children naturally. It started out as a white picket-fence family, and it would turn grimy as old Bobby had a secret. Because old Bobby loved the ladies! And I don't mean he loved them for their brains or abilities. Not at all. He adored them for what their bodies and what them bodies could do for him. See, he was a sex addict before sex addiction had become a
thing.
Yeah, a recognized problem.
Before it was cool.
Yeah, before Mad Men made it a thing. You know what I mean? He didn't just love ladies, but he wanted to document that love in the form of homemade porn.
Aw. Which precious. Some people do scrapbooks.
Some people
do,
Polaroid
video
porn
montages.
books.
And yeah, he did porn.
Exactly.
No kink shame.
No kink shame here. You Polaroided out. Well, it did, given the time period, he did end up fucking up his life and career. But we're going to talk more about that later. Let's talk about his beginnings in adulthood. His first plan as an adult was he wanted to get a job in radio. He had a voice for radio, or what do they say, a face for radio? He would send audition tapes up and down the East Coast from the time he graduated in 1946 till he finally landed a gig in 1950 in Hornell, New York with WLEA. His radio style was unlike the desired Walter Cronkite delivery, but instead a frantic and fast-paced showcase, which is exactly how I like to roll too, buddy. You'll never get the Walter Cronkite delivery with me.
Mm-mm.
He would stay here for 10 months until he got a job offer back in Connecticut, and he wanted to be home, so he took it. See, the funny thing is, his audition tape played slower than it was supposed to, so they were actually surprised at the energy he brought with him. They're like, oh, okay, so he's a little bit more rambunctious than we anticipated. Okay.
That's usually what they say about me after a job interview when I get on. Oh, you're a little bit more than we thought you were.
You really pulled it up in that interview. I'll tell you what. And so They were captivated, thankfully, and he was hired. And then Bob was quickly promoted to senior announcer and program director. This would be short-lived as he decided to take a job in Bridgeport, Connecticut at WLIZ. He would be in the morning slot until WLIZ purchased WICC, and Bob was promoted to program director again. Eventually, he would do what many in Search of Fame do and head to California to seek celebrity riches and fame. He had been hired to host his radio show for the KNX radio in Southern California. I don't know where all these letters come from.
Jimmy's Fun Facts. The identification and attribution of radio and television signals began during a 1912 conference centered on international radio telegraphs. To make a long story short, America was given the letters W, K, N, and A for their identification signals. N and A were chosen for military stations, and W and K were chosen for commercial use. In 1928, the Federal Radio Commission enacted some rules that still remain in effect today. Stations east of the Mississippi River are required to start their call names with W. Stations west of the Mississippi River must begin with K. And all radio TV call names are required to be 4 letters in length. Those stations are allowed to choose the remaining letters. Sometimes these letters represent the networks which own the radio station, such as WABC. Sometimes it's an actual station number, like KTWO or K2. Other times it can be formed into an acronym or word which describes the station or the theme, such as KISS FM.
He would interview more than 3,000 people from 1956 to 1965. People like Charlton Heston, Rod Sterling, even comedians like Red Skelton and Jerry Lewis, and then like just weird off-the-wall interviews, like one with a chimpanzee. So that was delightful. He would take his act to new levels by making his show unique. He began experimenting with sound effects. Like he'd take a salt shaker and he'd fill it with water and shake it out over a cup of water so it would make drip drop noises. So it would be the Borden's milk commercial. It'd be like, oh my gosh, this milk is so fresh. It sounds like it just came from that cow because it just did.
What do you do, a kazoo?
Wow. He graduated his act at impersonations and became known as KNX's King of the Airwaves.
Okay, King.
I have a couple clips today.
We're going to have Regis Philbin, who just received the word the other day that his TV show has been canceled, and Michael Jackson, who just received the word the other day that his radio show was canceled. We're going to find out why and all that sort of stuff at night.
Michael Jackson?
Regis Philbin and Michael Jackson. This is Bob Crane and the Raycon of Singers at 17 minutes after 6 on the KNX clock.
So he would use his drumming skills in his shows, often playing drums along with the sound of records on the air, which is like, there, of course, is a movie called Autofocus, which has Greg Kinnear, which is what really kind of got me into writing about the whole thing. It's based off of Bob Crane's life and his murder. And Greg Kinnear is like, he did an excellent version to me, like exactly what I would think Bob Crane would be like behind the airwaves. But it showed him just like that, just really enthusiastic, all about it. He was just like Mr. Popular in the room. Everybody was just connected to him by his charisma. His popularity, with his popularity, he was offered several times to take his show to television. He was even offered the role of The Tonight Show, but turned it down. And when he turned it down, Johnny Carson actually would take the role, and he would become the king of late night television in that era. And who would have thunk it? Had Bob Crane not had taken that role, we would never had Johnny Carson.
That's crazy.
So instead, he wanted to become an actor. And when his no acting clause of his contract with KNX expired, he began taking small television roles as movie parts, as well as acting roles in community theater. One of his early roles would be a radio announcer that was off screen in The Twilight Zone. And in 1962, he was on the Dick Van Dyke Show in the episode, Someone Has to Play Cleopatra. So because of this, there is an actress named Donna Reed, in case she gave him a permanent role on the Donna Reed Show. Never watched it. Didn't go watch it.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. As Dr. David Kelsey, he was sharpening his talent for acting, and he became restless on the Donna Reed Show. He was also worried that he'd be typecasted as a happy-go-lucky, upper-middle-class WASP father, so he left the show in 19 1964. Around this time, he was given the script about a series set during World War II and not a Nazi POW camp, which in hindsight was probably a super fucking hard sell because WW2 had only happened about 20 years previous. So I imagine it would be like us trying to do a TV show on an Iraqi POW camp post, 9/11, and nothing about that screams like a cutesy, demure TV comedy series.
Yeah, it's like too soon. Too
soon. I guess like we're so used to that being a part of our history that we never probably realized how weird that probably was.
Yeah.
So he was set to play Air Force Colonel Robert Hogan. His mission? To harass and injure the enemy at all costs in order to assist the Allies. During his initial screen test with Werner Klemperer, am I saying that right, Jimmy? Werner Klemperer, but it's E-R-E-R. Klemper. Werner Klemper. The chemistry was instant, and Bob agreed to the role. So, fun fact, Werner and the other actors who played the main Nazis were all Jewish, and some of them had actually fled from the Nazis during World War II.
Yee.
I mean, Robert Clary, a French Jew who played LeBeau, he spent 3 years in a concentration camp. His identity tattoo was on his arm, A5714.
Eee.
His parents and his other family members were killed there. And here he is playing a Nazi.
Eee.
No, he wasn't playing he was a French Jew. Never mind, just kidding. But regardless, it's so fucking awkward as shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This all feels very uncomfortable.
Very, right? Bob agreed, but only if it would not offend veterans and former POWs. So he requested that the pilot episode be sent to the veteran groups in the Midwest for feedback. And weirdly, everybody was like, I'm down with this. This is fucking hilarious. They said that they wouldn't have made it through the war without humor. And I think this is a beautiful life lesson, as well as an excuse for my terrible sense of humor.
I don't even know how to respond, so I'm just going to silently, okay, yeah.
So while working with KNX, he would juggle his acting roles at his radio show, but given what was at stake, Hogan's Heroes would need his full attention. So he took a leap of faith and resigned from KNX. And this would pay off, as it was obviously a tremendous success. And here's a little clip from Hogan's Heroes Season 1, Episode 2.
Make it fast. Haven't much time. Modeling, Schultz. We're going to take out that wall and put in a picture window. That'll give us a sweeping vista to the delousing station. Then we're going to replace this stuff with some Danish modern. What would you think of provincial? Please, Colonel Hogan. How else do we get the tank in? So we can take it apart. Oh, no. I don't see anything. I hear
Very much slapstick comedy.
Yeah.
As his career was skyrocketing, so was his dick, because homie was sleeping around on his wife with every broad that he could get his hands on, basically.
Play is gonna play.
Play is gonna play. He'd already had an affair with his Hogan co-star Cynthia Lynn, but when she was replaced with a new actress to play Hilda, Patricia Olson, who went under the stage name Sigrid Valdis, this would seal his marriage's fate. He would divorce his first wife after 21 years in 1970, and then later that year married Patricia, and they'd have a son, Robert Scott Crane, in 1971, and he would go by the name Scotty, and they would also adopt a daughter. Scotty, however, was not his child, truthfully. Patty was already pregnant when she got Bob, and he also had a successful vasectomy in 1968 while he was still married to Anne, so he was shooting blanks. I mean, at least he thought ahead. You know what I mean? This was pre-AIDS pandemic where STDs were... It was like... Later on, they'll talk about this, where he always would pee after sex because he thought that would prevent STDs.
Oh.
Like, it was such misinformation.
Yeah.
Let's rewind back to the beginning of Hogan's Hero, to the story of when Bob's downfall really began, when he met John Carpenter. No, not the John Carpenter who directed legendary movies like The Thing, but John Henry Carpenter of Los Angeles. He was born June 28, 1928, with Hispanic and Native American heritage on a reservation in Los Angeles. to Henry and Molly Carpenter. He had jet black hair, a dark complexion, which came from both sides of his heritage, but he mostly identified with his indigenous roots, saying he was not bad for an Indian.
Okie doke.
Not much is known about him except for what he's told us. Like, his father left when he was about 8, so he and his mother struggled to survive during the Depression. He would marry at 18 and have a son, John Jr., but he left not long after John Jr. was born, joined the army, and was a tank commander in South Korea. And of course, like all soldiers, when you go to Korea, obviously your marriage is going to fail.
Because you gotta get some.
You gotta get some. So he came home. He pretty much moved on from his life as a married man and into the field of electronics. His first job after his time in the army was a TV set company, Hoffman Easy Vision. And then he moved on to work for Lear Aviation, where he installed radios in airplanes. In 1955, he would marry Diana Tutakan, who he met in a bar. And I am sure you will not be surprised when I say he was also a serial adulterer and loved sex.
Not surprised at all.
As told to a reporter in 1992, I always kind of separated sex and love. I never gave cheating a lot of thought. To me, it was just sex. Maybe I was wrong, but that's the truth.
I mean, at least you
At least he lives his
have any
truth.
emotional ties to these people, I guess,
Yeah. In the early 1960s, he was hired as a regional service manager at Song Electronics. Not Song. Sony. I
Oh, wow.
corrected it. Song.
That was a misspeak.
Real big one. But given that it really hadn't hit the home market yet, home video was a novelty for the upper class who couldn't afford, and not for the regular people who could afford this. People like us.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, they get the cutting edge. I got to wait 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
His job was basically to explain home video technology for potential customers. According to him, President Lyndon B. Johnson had the first VCR, followed by comedian Red Skeleton. You know, it's funny. Do you know anything about Lyndon B. Johnson?
A little bit.
Do you know anything about his member?
His member as in his penis?
Yeah.
When I researched him in history in high school, they didn't really talk about it.
Yeah.
They skipped over that part.
He had a big old dangling.
Good for him.
I mean, right? But
Good
he
for
also
him.
was like a serial adulterer, very much into sex, and he would do wild shit. Like, he didn't like you. He would make you follow him into the bathroom while y'all were discussing maybe White House policies, and would take a piss in front of that person. Like, he would do things like that, and he would also always be throwing out his dick to show people, oops, surprise penis.
Why he unraveled it
Yes.
Fantastic. Thanks. I look at him differently now. I
There's
went my whole life without knowing that.
I didn't even write this down. This is just shit I knew about Lyndon B. Johnson. I don't know a lot about
Just useless
presidents.
trivia that flows around in my head, but yet I can't remember how to get to a certain spot in Houston.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, but I can tell you to the inch how big, to the millimeter how big Lyndon Johnson's dick was. Yeah. Don't come at me, bro.
Well, it was hysterical. Okay.
Oh.
So, John was confident and smart and had a strong work ethic to succeed. So he became known in celebrity circles for his tech knowledge. That's how he met Richard Dawson. So Richard Dawson was a British comedian and actor, which you might recognize him as the original host of Family Feud.
And God knows he liked to fuck because he kissed everybody.
Oh, yeah. Dawson would become friends with John and invite him onto the set of Hogan's Heroes in 1966, where he would meet Bob Crane. Bob and Dawson had a strained relationship at best because Dawson felt like he was jilted for the main role. He had a lot of experience, had been an actor for some time, but then they turned around and gave the lead role to a goofy ass fucking DJ? You fucking kidding me, dog?
You kidding me?
John, however, hit it off with Bob immediately. For one, they loved electronics, and two, they loved getting laid.
Who doesn't?
Right. Not me. At this point in time, Bob had just a collection of Polaroids and other different photos, which I'm like, how do you get that shit what's it called? Developed. How do you get that shit developed back in that time without getting in trouble? I don't fucking know. But he just had basically a little album with his sexcapades and all the girls and stuff.
Were they Polaroids? Or, because Polaroids.
It was a mix of both.
Oh, okay.
Polaroids and just regular photography. Sometimes it would be women in just various stages of undress. And sometimes it'd be like a camera shot of close-up fellatio.
But, back then people minded their business more than they do now.
They really did. They really did. John would be the key to him to be getting his own amateur pornography collection. Okay. Starring Bob, John, and any amount of willing young ladies.
Aw. Scrapbooking before scrapbooking was scrapbooking.
I mean, right? This brings friends closer together.
It really does.
Closer than their dicks, I guess.
Yeah.
They began to get a whole shtick down so they could increase their chances of getting laid. So either Bob would invite girls to the bar after the show, or he would just use himself as fucking bait. Because he was Hogan, Colonel Hogan, the Colonel. And,
what more needs to be said?
Fucking TV had 3 channels back in, so you was watching what was on.
Yeah.
You don't get no pay-per-view.
I'm Hogan.
No demand. Yeah. That's all they knew. And just like a remora fish attaches to a shark, John latched on to Bob's celebrity to get laid as often as possible, and his video equipment made him irreplaceable to Bob. A parasitic, symbiotic relationship at its purest form, really. So once they found a couple broads, they would do the job. They would be invited to drunk breakfast, which is like the 1 a.m. Waffle House.
Love it.
Which I don't know if Waffle House was around quite yet, but maybe the equivalent of in the 60s. And so all while drinks were being poured, inhibitions would start going out the fucking window, right?
Of course.
If they got nervous, he would promise VIP tickets to his next show or something along those lines. Basically, whatever he could do to make them comfortable enough to get him to the final step, which was his apartment. His place was often decked out with cameras and other video equipment, even on the road as John would fly in wherever Bob was to join him on his escapades and set up his equipment. Bob would kiss and compliment the girls. Oh, you're so beautiful. I need to take a picture of you. Just showering her with adoration, love bombing her enough so that when he asked for girls to remove their clothes, they did so willingly and often. So good news from what I've read and other witness statements, I do know that he respected a no. He hated it, but he would stop when a woman would ask. He wasn't a belligerent drunk either. He barely drank, if at all, usually drinking a non-alcoholic beverage as his only real vice was that of the vaginal variety.
Oh.
Once girls were all in, that's when the video equipment would be turned on. Now, there's some debate on whether the women knew if they were being taped or not, but for the most part, from the videos, which I did not watch, but I'll take their word for it, they seemed to interact with the camera. So I would just assume that it was the naivety of the time.
Okay, well, first of all, let's just go ahead and squash any concerns that women didn't know. Video cameras back then were not discreet.
They were not, no.
Even if you put it behind a wall, the hole that would have to be cut out for the lens would be about 4x4. So let's all stop fucking around.
That is a big eyeball on that sheep in this portrait right here.
And even if you're like, oh, it's not on, it's not on. We all know if you are over the age of 30, there was a big flashing light on the front to indicate it was.
Exactly.
We're not talking about nowadays times where they could trick you. So let's all just stop playing. They knew. Carry on.
But like it also, that brings into the next statement though, is that we know that these days private photos don't remain private. Videos that we take on our phones don't usually remain private, especially in digital form. But in that time, it wasn't like making at-home porno was a normal activity. So these girls were like, okay, this is cool. I'm just doing this for Colonel Hogan. Okay. And I'm sure if they realized how many people he showed these fucking photos and videos to, they would have definitely kept their clothes on.
Right? It's not exactly how you want to be remembered through the history of all history is films and pictures for all of eternity.
Exactly. Especially me sucking
your
someone's dick.
Ding-a-lang.
Yeah.
Now they're so easily accessible as well.
Right.
I could look right now while you read the story and watch one.
Now you would think the act was the whole deal. Like the voyeurism would stop there. Nope. He would take the time to edit his videos and to actualize pornos, cheesy music and all.
First of all, you're not giving him the creative genius energy that he deserves. Okay. Jimmy edits ours, but do you know how easy it is nowadays? That man had to really put some time and grit and workmanship into that. So if we could just take a moment and recognize where recognition is due.
Where it is due.
I ain't mad at you, Bob.
I just can only imagine what he chose, what music at the time. It's probably music that we've heard in elevators.
Yeah, probably.
Not a word. Not a word. Just the sound of flesh slapping. Sorry. I just innately want to vomit.
A whole bunch of...
So, and like I said, after he made his porns, he would definitely be like, come on in, sit down. Let me show you what I did with Cindy last Tuesday. Like, this was his shit. Like, let me look at my talent. Look at my fucking art.
It would be so awkward if, like, last week when we had dinner with you and we came over, if y'all were like, oh my God, look at what we made last week. I'd be like, oh yeah. Oh, my tummy's hurting. I gotta go.
But you're damn right. That would have been so fucking awkward. Like, I remember we and Jimmy were hanging out with this guy that we knew, and the guy just kept showing us comedy clips on YouTube in his apartment, and just me and Jimmy are sitting on the couch, and it's like, you know, that time of the evening that you go, why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's like an out of control party or something, like, or you're getting a little too sloppy drunk. I never thought it would be watching random ass fucking YouTube videos on some stranger's fucking couch.
They weren't like clips of him. They were just random clips.
Just random clips of different comedians.
All right.
And he's like, well, isn't that funny?
Like,
well,
hilarious.
when you ask me, it loses a little of its humor, don't it?
It's like explaining a joke.
And so then I had to do the whole, you know, I'm a mom. I got a little baby. I got to be up early. I'm tired. Gotta go. So Gail and Rocco. Yeah,
sure.
Gail recalled meeting him a month before his death in Scottsdale, Arizona. Her friend Brenda Broyles and Crane were visiting the Registry Resort Bar where Gail worked as a bartender. Gail and Brenda were friends and sometimes lovers, and Gail was eager to accept their invite to breakfast and the drinks at Bob's apartment right after. So she went to go meet them for breakfast, realized they weren't there, and then she was like, oh, they must have already blazed through breakfast. Goes to the apartment, knocks on the door. He answers it, butt ass fucking naked. Just
Nice.
ready.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is how you knew it was a time before paparazzi was like really out of control, because he would not have made it today, dog.
Mm-mm.
His dick would be on the front of TMZ.
100.
Like, it's ridiculous. Like, even, what was it, yesterday, that kid from One Direction passed away?
Mm-hmm.
TMZ posted parts of his body
Oh my.
after he passed
That's too much.
to show, like, oh, this is definitely him, because look, it's his tattoos. And then everyone was like, the fuck?
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, whoops, let me take that down. Remembering him. You can't pivot into a remembrance thing.
Mm-mm.
You can't. No, TMZ. You done did it.
Too far.
Too far. And over here, homie over here, butt ass naked, just answering the door like it's
Dang-a-lang, just swang-a-lang.
like it's Pizza Hut delivering his pepperoni pizza or some shit. Like, sir, keep the dick away. So she saw her friend Brenda was in the back of the apartment already naked. So she's like, come on in. They got her a drink. And then Gail noticed that the TV and the video recorder were live. So you could see herself walking across the living room. This did nothing to deter them from getting down and dirty in a threesome, though. And then afterwards, he rewound the tape so they could watch their handiwork. And then they got all turned on again. And I said, let's go for round 2, baby.
Okay.
And then everybody passed out at 4 a.m. And that's when she noticed he was like a super heavy sleeper. And that's an important fact that we'll come back to later. I didn't just talk about that because I wanted to talk about sex. This was the last time she would see Bob. A couple days later, they would go out again, but this time it was just Gail and Bob. He wanted to show her some of his movies as well as some of his many various albums of naked women and sex acts. When the TV came on, it wasn't porno, though. It was Hogan's Hero. And then Bob was like, that's As he saw himself on the TV.
Stop.
Honestly, he was very, like, genuinely
In love with
Leave
himself.
It to Beaver type of fella. Like the dad from Leave It to Beaver, like happy, like, just real cheesy. And then you have this weird factor about it. Like, you make me feel so dirty.
I wasn't going to shame him for any of his exploits, his filming, his photo albums, because as long as you weren't forcing people, do you, boo-boo? But you disgust me at the fact that you're amazed at watching yourself on your show. Like, ugh.
I never listen to our recordings. That's a lie, I do. And every time I laugh my ass off. We're so fucking funny.
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I start judging myself too much, so I'm like, nah, I don't need to listen.
I truly don't like listening to it, except for the fact that we're funny. But generally, I listen to it so I can come up with titles. Jimmy always comes up with a suggestion, and then I'll be like, "That's not good. Mine's funnier."
That's why they're great.
Okay, 9 times out of 10. Yeah, that 1 out of 10 is a banger, Jimmy.
That's right, Jimmy.
Yes, it is.
Know your worth.
He's a little sound engineer that could. And so, like I spoke earlier,
I can't.
Richard Dawson's son Mark once told the Phoenix News, John Carpenter and Bob Crane were 2 of the greatest pussy hounds in history and enjoyed each other's company as they went for it. And nothing could be truer of a statement, but like all things in life, some great things must come to an end eventually. So let's talk about life after Hogan's Heroes in the last few years of Bob's life. So Hogan's Heroes would run for 6 seasons. It would earn 12 Emmy nominations, 2 that Werner Klemper won for outstanding performance of an actor in a supporting role. It would also be honored in the first NAACP Image Awards in 1967, one of the 7 shows that were recognized for the furtherance of the African American image.
Okay.
So it started out strong, ranking number 9 in the Nielsen ratings for the first season, but the subsequent seasons would shift out of the top 30 spots. CBS Fred Silverman began what would become known as the rural purge in television, where he would cancel shows that he felt only appealed to older and more rural audiences. And of course, Hogan's Heroes would be one of those shows that got axed in 1971. Bob would go on to star in 2 Disney films, Gus and Superdad, as well as several different theater productions. Superdad would be a major flop despite his acting being pretty good. And Gus was barely memorable. I do have the clip of from Superdad that I just was like, it's the trailer that's on Amazon Prime. And listening to what he said, I was like, oh, you're a silly goose.
Get back in the pond.
Kurt Russell is also in this movie.
Oh, interesting.
Superdad. Hold on. Let's see.
Isn't he terrific, Dad?
No, he's all right.
He's a little bit more than all right.
Come on, honey, it's a question of balance. Once you get up, it's easy.
It's a balance. Once you get up,
It's
easy. Sir, that's a double entendre. The period of time after Hogan's Heroes and before his death would be a drastic downfall for Bob. He was trying to relaunch his career, so he decided to purchase the rights to play Beginner's Luck. Not only would he star in the play, but he would also direct it and take the play on the road to different theaters across the country. He did guest star on a whole mess of TV shows at the time, but in 1975, he would return to the screen on his own show, The Bob Crane Show on NBC. It would not be a talk show like the title implies, but a sitcom about a man named Bob Wilcox who quits his job as an insurance salesman in his 40s to return to medical school. Why would you name it The Bob Crane Show then, if his name was Bob Wilcox?
Okay, thank you, because I was waiting for a break to ask you. It was called The Bob Crane Show, but his name was Bob Wilcox in it?
I was baffled. I was
Okay.
like, wait a second. Did somebody write this wrong? Did
Right?
Wikipedia get it wrong? No. They just were terrible at naming shows, I guess.
Apparently.
Regardless, after 13 episodes and abysmal Nielsen ratings, it was canceled, and he would resume his theater and pussyhound touring. There was even one. It was like a show for like cooking show or something like that. And the show itself was on air, but this particular episode was never put on air because it happened right before, it was filmed right before he passed away. And he went on like this weird comedy tangent about sex, which was very unusual for him. And so they're like, out of respect, we're not going to release this posthumously, okay? Because it's going to make him look a little awful. In June 1978, Bob would temporarily reside in the Winfield Place Apartments in Scottsdale, Arizona during his run of the show at the local Windmill Dinner Theater. By that point in time, Bob's divorce from his second wife was merely weeks away from being finalized. And it would be here that Bob's life would end. Like I said before, he was on Run for Beginner's Luck in Scottsdale, and at 2:15 on June 29th in the afternoon, his co-star, Victoria Ann Barry, knocked on his apartment door and received no answer. But she did note that the morning's paper was still outside. She noticed the door was unlocked, so she went in and straight to the back deck to the pool area. She checked the pool, as he was known to take a few laps in it often, and he was not there. Thinking maybe he overslept, she went to head towards his room, and the door was slightly ajar, but it was completely dark. All the drapes were pulled, the lights were off. So, like, as she enters the room and her eyes adjust to the darkness, she realizes there's a figure in the bed, and it's covered in blood. Lots of it. So that's when she, like, hauls ass and says, time for the police. She wasn't sure who was in the bed, but she knew, based off the blood, they were most likely dead. The police noticed a white male laying on his side in a near fetal position with his head resting on the pillow and his left hand under his head. There would be a wound on the head and a lot of blood, as well as what appeared a electric cord tied around his neck. And the body would belong to that of Bob Crane.
Sad face.
Now begins the task of handling the crime scene, piecing together the last 24 hours, rounding up potential witnesses and suspects and all that jazz. That makes it sound hella professional, but remember, this is the 70s, before DNA and advanced crime scene investigation techniques were
a thing.
To add to the complications, the Scottsdale Police Department had no homicide division in 1978. So that means having Victoria Barry sit in the kitchen and chain smoke cigarettes while they process the scene in the same fashion as the Boulder Police and John Benet Ramsey's case allowed friends and family to walk all over that crime scene. Like, literally, just sat there smoking cigarettes. No concern, right? As she's sitting there distraught, sad, obviously, the phone rings and the investigator goes, why don't you answer? Because why not have the police answer it? No, that doesn't make sense. What she didn't realize at that point would be the beginning of several calls to Bob's apartment during the initial investigation. It was a man asking for Bob, and as soon as he stated his name was John Carpenter, Lieutenant Ron Dean of the Scottsdale Police Department took over the call. He did not relay what happened, but only that there had been an incident. John stated that he had been with Bob the night before, and they had originally planned for Bob to give John a ride to the airport the next morning. It was 1 a.m. when he last spoke to him and called him on the phone, and Bob told him he was in his boxers editing, I wrote Saturday Night Live, it's not it. It's not it.
His Saturday night events the night before?
The John Travolta movie.
Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah. And he was, I don't know why I wrote Saturday Night Live. But it's Saturday Night Fever so he could get all the F words taken out so his 7-year-old son, Scotty, could watch it. And with it being late, Bob decided that he had appointments the next day and that he was sleeping and that John should just get himself to the airport. And so the investigator cut the call short because he still had a whole ass, crime scene to process and fuck up. So another call would come in not long after that, and Barry would answer it again. And this time it was a woman. She asked where Bob was, and she answered curtly, well, Bob isn't here. Like, first of all, you won't get jealous, man's dead, okay? It was Cindy Dyer, one of the many women Bob had been messing around with while he was in Scottsdale. She was an aspiring singer, and she had wanted to leave him a tape. Her signed headshot was actually still laying on the counter where Bob had left it. So the third call came. This time it was Bobby Crane Jr. So he has Scotty from his second marriage that I talk about, and then Bobby Jr. from his first marriage. His other children aren't really as involved as necessarily as these two. So Bobby Crane was calling to thank his dad for his birthday card that he had received. They did not rely what happened, nor that the police were there. Just, said that Bob was out, and he was like, oh, we'll just have him call me back. Then John Carpenter called back again. Weirdly. Remember, there was no news that Bob had died, just that there had been an incident. John relayed again that it was the 1 a.m. story about last talking to Bob, and that it was such a weird conversation. Lieutenant Dean was curious what made John so curious, and began to get as much info out of John as possible, because this is the second time he's calling back, obviously very sus. Not once did John ask what the incident was, nor was he asked about his whereabouts. All of this was volunteered up. And as we all know, criminals love to return to the scene of the crime, and they damn show love to pretend to help the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So they were able to figure out that while Carpenter stayed at a hotel during his visit, he knew a whole lot of details about Bob's apartment and the video equipment and its placement. What he did not tell the lieutenant is that he had also been making a lot of calls to other people that morning, starting with the Windmill Dinner Theater, where he asked if Bob was there, when he would be there, and if he would be on stage at 8 that night. Then he asked for Victoria Berry's number. Jenny Brown, who had answered the phone at the dinner theater, refused, and Carpenter was a dick and was like, well, you're not really friendly, and hung up.
Oh, burn.
Oh, no, I'm so hurt. Honestly, I wish somebody would pay me such a nice compliment.
Mm-hmm.
He would call back in 15 minutes and then talk to Linda Henshaw, the executive producer for the show. After asking the same questions, Linda asked what the matter was, as she detected a morose tone in his voice, to which he said it was nothing, just that he'd been trying to get in touch with Bob to let him know that he got back to California just fine. Now, at this point, the theater knew the police were at the apartment, but not about Bob's death. They had rented and paid for the apartment for their stars. They even called it the Romeo apartment, because they had a lot of single celebrity actors stay there, right? Regardless, Bob never came to the theater till evening time and was known to show up mere minutes before the performance, driving the theater crazy. So how did John, Bob's notorious and constant sidekick, not know that? Or was he trying to drop hints of his alibi while fishing for information? How curious, how peculiar. So prior to his call of Bob's apartment, John had called Bobby Jr. John never called Bobby except on the rare occasion when he needed to take something to Bob, but never after a visit. Usually just beforehand. Like, hey, I need you to take this to your dad or whatever. He also stated that if there's anything he can do, just to give him a call, and because he was in California as well. It was a 60-second conversation that was so odd, Bobby noted the time. At 3 p.m., there was no one outside Victoria Berry, the Scottsdale police, and the murderer who had known about Bob's death. So as they processed the apartment, the house and the stage managers of the Windmill came down and positively ID'd Bob as the person deceased in bed. By 4 p.m., Dr. Heinz Karnischnik from the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office arrived at the scene. The body was cold and rigor mortis had set in at this point. Then he did something no one expected. Instead of waiting to get the body back at the morgue to perform his autopsy, he pulls out a scalpel and starts cutting at the wound on Bob's head.
Oh.
And he wants to see
the
impression of the wound on the skull.
Oh, okay.
The crime scene was actually taped, and you can hear the doctor and his accent in the background.
An electrical cord cut from a video camera was found tied around Crane's neck. There was no examiner shaves Crane's battered head for a closer look at the fatal wound.
But like you can hear him in his German accent. We have different blows here that are different. That sounded almost French. Anyways, he also removed the cord from the neck, where he stated it's believed that it had been tied at or around the time of death. The cord was covered in blood, and apparently blood in liquid form is extremely difficult to lift from, so there were none on the cord that they could salvage. The working theory is that he was bludgeoned while asleep, and in the last moments of death or during the death rattle, the murderer also strangled the body to ensure demise. The doctor also noticed an unusual V pattern on the sheet, indicating the murder weapon's shape and that it had been sat there on the sheet, transferring the blood. So the sheet would also be taken into evidence, which was pretty stacked for the time. They had blood and brain matter, fingerprints galore, a whole ass porno collection. Motherfuckers had shit to do, okay? The investigation put together what they believed is the best summation of his last evening alive. Of course, he would perform at the Windmill Theater, and then after curtain call, he would stay in the lobby signing photographs. Hogan's Heroes was still heavily syndicated at the time, and he loved fans and taking photos and signing autographs. So John, since he was in town, would have sat near the front in the VIP section. Then he met him in the green room where they could head out around 10:30 p.m. This is when Victoria Berry last saw him alive. She reminded him that the next day they were going to be running lines at 2 p.m. in his apartment. He then realized that his Monte Carlo had a flat, so he drove it because the station for tires and stuff was like literally a block away. And he was like, oh, let's just fucking do it. Drops it off, and the attendants note that he's in a vehicle he gets in the vehicle with an Indian-looking man, which they assume is John Carpenter. So John and Bob arrive to his apartment where he calls his estranged wife and gets into a heated argument. This is so loud, the neighbors above could hear everything, even noting that he might lose his voice because of how loud he was screaming. Like, oh, he ain't gonna be able to perform if he keep hollering like that. He would come out of his room going, oh, that woman, let's go find some music. And they drove 30 minutes away to a club called Bogart's. At Bogart's, they would get sworn because he was a celebrity, and John would be introduced as his manager, which is something they had done before when scoring chicks. This is where they would meet 20-something brunette Carol Newell. Shortly after Bob left the table and called his estranged wife again, to which he returned in a sour mood, indicating that his wife was jealous of everything, even his relationship with his children. Just before midnight, Bob calls Carol Barr, who is a 40-something blonde, which was his type, and they agreed to meet at the Safari Hotel coffee shop, which is where he would always get his breakfast, in about 45 minutes. So he gathered Carol and John, and off to the Safari they go. After they eat, John leaves with Carol, and Bob attempts to seduce Carolyn to get her back to either his or her apartment. And she says no, and Bob goes back to his apartment alone. John also tries to get lucky. He had been staying at a different hotel, but she declined his advances, and he drove her home. This is important in two ways. So John normally stayed with Bob wherever he was staying, but in the weeks leading up to their visit to Scottsdale, Bob had begun reeling back his relationship with John and suggested that they start staying in different apartments, different places, beginning a slow attempt to end the relationship. John told Carolyn that he had intended to go back to Bob's apartment to visit, drink, and hang out till they left for the airport, which conflicts the account of John, where he said he returned to his apartment and called Bob instead. So back at his apartment, according to John, Bob was still editing Saturday Night Fever, but that also conflicts with the fact that he told his estranged wife, Patty, earlier before they got into an argument that he had already completed the editing of that movie. So what really happened was, what we really believed happened was that John did go to Bob's that night, and it would be the last time anyone saw Bob alive. And that is where we'll pick up next time.
See, I'm suspicious of his friend because the very first thing that you said was his very first phone call. He said he was sitting in his bed editing the movie in his boxers. I never, ever described to somebody that I was sitting in my underwear doing anything. So I was already like, why do you know so much detail?
And that's exactly.
That was the first thing. I'm like, oh, he's already sus. Because he was like, he was in his boxers in the bed editing. How do you know he was in his boxers?
Exactly.
So, you know, the people always give too much details. It's always in the details.
Yeah.
Should have been I called he was editing a movie for his kid because there's a bunch of cuss words and that was it. But the fact that you were so descriptive, it's always in the details, people.
It's how you get trapped.
It's how you get caught. It's how you get got.
How you get got. So, well, this is going to be interesting, though. I can't
is.
wait to tell you the next half of the story because it gets even more wild.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you guys, check out our socials. Instagram, Facebook, all that jazz. Check out our merch. Let us know if you have your own Too Close to Home stories. And then, of course, please rate and subscribe on all the platforms you possibly listen to us. Maybe even the ones you don't, because you might love us.
Exactly.
The more visibility we gain, the more possibility we can make this a full-time gig. And you guys would get far more regular episodes.
For sure.
Help me, I'm poor. Well, until next time,
Stay safe.
keep your head on a swivel.
Don't bring it so close to home that I come to your house and you pull out your scrapbook and show me pictures of you creating pornography
Bang-a-langin'.
with your
Doing a
dang-a-langin'.
Lyndon B. Johnson.
You don't want to
Pulling
see
out the Johnson. Hey!
it. Hey.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode of Too Close to Home, don't forget to rate and subscribe to us on most platforms. Follow us on our social media at Too Close Home Pod on Facebook, at Too Close Podcast on Instagram, or if you have your own Too Close to Home experience, shoot us your story at tooclosetohome@yahoo.com. Thanks for listening.